So I am one of 3 kids. I have an older sister and a younger brother. I'm the classic middle, or classic since I'm the second girl. And I don't know if your family is like mine, but my parents have like a handful of stories that they always go to talk about us when we were kids. And eventually it gets to the point where you can kind of recount these stories as if they're your own memory, even though I have no recollection of half of them. So one of my mom's favorites is when I actually said my first sentence. Just so to paint a picture, I was in the kitchen with my older sister, and she decided that mom and dad weren't in the room and she was going to rescue the cookies from the cookie jar. And we didn't just have a cookie jar that was sitting on a counter, it was actually up in a cabinet. So that required her to like pull over a chair, get onto the counter, open the cabinet. She went up to grab the cookie jar, at which point I ran into the living room and said to my mom, "Mommy, sissy's up high." So for better or worse, my mom ran into the kitchen and caught Jen in the act of rescuing the cookies. And to this day, she hasn't thanked me for her like not getting a broken bone. She said that was my debut into tattletelling. But what's interesting about this is that 2-year-olds, or just kids in general, they have the ability to kind of capture something in a moment and just simplify it, make sure that it's concise and actionable, and focus on the things that matter. I didn't go in and tell my mom, "Hey, there's cookies," or say all these random words. I just said, "Mommy, sissy's up high," because I knew that would get her attention. And I actually have a 2-year-old, and something I've noticed is very similar, how she'll just say things that are kind of the most obvious things. "Mommy, sit, I want ice cream for breakfast" has been my recent favorite. So kind of today we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get concise, relevant messages, and what the challenge is today that we're kind of not as precise as 2-year-olds. But before getting into all that detail, just to give you a little background about what I do on a day-to-day basis, I work at Dotdash, which used to be about.com. You're probably more familiar with about.com if you ever ended up on the site when you were in maybe high school or college. We rebranded to Dotdash a couple years ago, which for those of you who are curious, it's the A in Morse code is Dotdash. I don't know why I have to explain that, but that's what they were excited about. And About Health was converted to Very Well. About Food became The Spruce Eat. So you might have been familiar with some of these other brands. And most recently, we acquired Investopedia and Birdie in My Domain. And essentially what we do on a day-to-day basis is we have about 90 million unique views, and we help brands or help people solve problems. And we say that, I know every brand likes to help people solve problems, that's kind of why we're all here, but we do it in the most mundane way. So like, what are you making for dinner? How do I apply for a mortgage? And turns out a lot of people are navigating these kind of regular mundane challenges day to day. So that's what the Dotdash family of sites does. What I do is I'm responsible for identifying, packaging, and communicating our product offerings to the marketplace, which means I kind of connect the dots internally, as I'm sure most of you as product marketers do. So I work very closely with the site and content team, and then also the sales team, to ensure that whatever the editorial priorities are things that we could actually take to market. And in my role, I have to tailor my message to be relevant to whoever I'm speaking to. So if I'm talking to the head of front-end engineering, it's going to be a very different conversation than if I'm talking to the head of sales. The end goal is the same, but how I craft the message is going to be very different. And since this is about a TLDR, for those of you who aren't familiar with TLDR, it means too long, didn't read. And often nowadays it's kind of just like a summary of what the article is. This is today's TLDR. It's to make it simple but significant. I'm a huge Mad Men fan. Hopefully some of you appreciate Don Draper as well. And this is just like wisdom from Don Draper that we're going to dive into in a little more depth. So before talking about the framework, I first just want to context set and talk a little bit about how we got where we're at. It's surprising that it's so hard to get our messages through to our audiences, being that technological innovations have actually helped us go from writing letters to communicate all the way to sending a text message or FaceTiming. It's pretty incredible where we're at nowadays. It's unlocked so many avenues to foster better communication, but here we are struggling to be heard. So I think that there are 3 key challenges with real-world message delivery. The first is information overload, and that's on the part of the consumer, and we're all consumers day to day as well, so you could be sympathetic to that. The second is the explosion of big data, And the last is just the speed at which the world is moving, where decisions have to be made more quickly than ever before. So let's talk a little bit about this. So we've gone from being exposed to about 500 ads a day back in the 1970s to as many as 5,000 ads today. And this study was actually from 2006, so I'm sure that we're exposed to even more ads on a day-to-day basis. And what's crazy, if you think about it, is in the 1970s, if an advertiser placed an ad on one of the big three networks, so that's like ABC, CBS, and NBC, they could actually reach 70% of the viewing audience. That's incredible. Definitely not something that you could do today. So we're combating the quantity of messages that consumers receive on a day-to-day basis. And what's happened is that consumers have started tuning out the noise. I'm sure you've heard that saying before. And what they're doing is they have ad blockers, they have email filters, we have DVR and TiVo, and they become really selective about the conversations that they are willing to have with brands. So we're challenged with making sure that our message is concise, relevant, and actionable, and we're trying to compete with all these other messages. So like, how can we succeed? It's definitely created a problem for us. The second aspect and blocker, I like to call it, is the amount of data that's available. So over the last 2 years, 90% of the data in the world was created. And according to an IBM study, I read that 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are produced every day. I didn't know what quintillion was. I hadn't heard of it, so I looked it up. There are 18 zeros in quintillion, for those of you who are curious, which means there's so much more information at our fingertips. It's not like the 70s or the 80s or even 10 years ago where you really had to dig deep to try to find the proof points to kind of communicate what you're trying to prove. Nowadays, we have so much information, it could be overwhelming. I don't know if you guys have been in that situation where you're trying to kind of craft that message and convince your audience of something and you don't know where to start because there's so much good stuff. So distilling a message is actually even more challenging because we have so much data and insights at our fingertips. So Don Draper lived in a world that was a little bit easier to communicate a message because he had limited information to work from. And I think that many marketers throw the whole book at their client and they overload them rather than choosing the message that will resonate most effectively. So we really need to get clarity on the message we want to communicate to our audience, hence 2-year-old wisdom. And the last blocker is just related to the speed at which things are moving. I read this and I found this really interesting. In 2007, Facebook was still competing with MySpace. Amazon was primarily known for selling books, and the iPhone had just been released. I also looked up Uber and Venmo. They didn't launch until 2009, so we were living in a very different world, and it's crazy to think that it was only 12 years ago. Pretty incredible. But ultimately, what this means is all this technological innovation. I don't know about you, but I basically do most of my shopping, like for clothes and for groceries, on my phone. I do most of my payment directly from my phone. I came in an Uber today. So all the technological innovation has actually allowed us to create efficiencies, but then there's also this expectation that we could answer emails more quickly or do things more quickly than ever before. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, and ultimately, consumers have a shorter window to make those purchasing decisions. So they have all this information coming towards them. The messages might not be as tight as they were 10, 20 years ago. And then at the same time, they're expected to make decisions really quickly. Like, no wonder it's hard to be heard. So how do we win? I'm going to share with you a simple framework that I use with my teams when we're crafting RFPs or RFIs or just in general when we're talking to internal stakeholders. You'll probably look at this and be like, Jackelyn, that is so obvious. Yes, that's the point. But we're going to go through it together and just use it a little bit in practice. So these are the 4 steps. So the first is defining your objective. So what's my end goal? What problem am I looking to solve, as one of my bosses used to always say. And actually saying that out loud in meetings, sometimes you don't realize that you're not on the same page as someone. You're looking to solve different problems. So I think it's really valuable to actually define the problem that you're looking to solve. Are you looking to socialize a new product feature? Are you looking to change consumer perception about a specific aspect of a product line? I think it's good to just, in a sentence, say what problem you're looking to solve. The second is to know your audience, and this means understanding the types of messages that matter to them. And I think this is where many marketers go astray. They craft this tight message that would work beautifully for one audience, but it just falls flat with another audience. So really asking yourself, is this an internal presentation? Is this external? Am I talking to the buyers or the creatives? Am I talking to the brand themselves? I think that could really change how you actually craft the message as well. And then that is related to number 3, which is identify the strongest data points for your audience. As mentioned earlier, we have more data than ever before, and this does not mean that we should be using all of the data and all of the insights. This isn't a senior thesis or anything like that. This is an exercise in crafting the strongest message, and the strongest data point for one audience is going to be different than another. So if I'm talking to the head of front-end engineering, very different conversation and proofs that I'm going to use to try to get to my end goal than if I'm talking to the head of sales. And lastly, execute, craft that TLDR. And I think ultimately the message delivery can impact how you craft it or how exactly you go about doing it. If you're sending something in an email versus an in-person presentation versus social, obviously that's going to impact it, but I think the overall framework remains the same regardless. So now the fun part, this is the most fun part of crafting this presentation, is coming up with some examples so we can kind of walk through the framework together. So you're probably looking at this. For those of you who know who James Taylor is, I grew up listening to his music, another fun pastime with my parents. And this year, I'm actually approaching my 10-year wedding anniversary. We were in Rome back in 2009, and we had the opportunity to hear James Taylor live. So while I was there, towards the end of the concert, he invited people to kind of come down, get close to the stage while he sang his last couple songs. And then what I noticed is that he started signing people's tickets. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in Rome in an outdoor amphitheater. I need to get James Taylor to sign my ticket. So defining your objective. My objective was clear. Go home with a James Taylor signed ticket. Know my audience. So while I know all of his songs, I don't know that much about James Taylor personally and what drives him. I just knew he's American, he's an English speaker, he was kind enough to invite us down here, and now he's signing these tickets. He also is not gonna go till midnight, so we probably have a short window that we could execute this plan. And then I identified the strongest data points. I was like, okay, he's an English speaker. I came all the way from New York to see him. I think those are the 2 things that are gonna make the biggest difference if he even hears what I'm about to say. And then I crafted my TLDR. He walked past me on the stage and I said, James Taylor, I came from New York. I've been listening to your music since I was 5. Please sign my ticket. And lo and behold, he leaned over. I was the last ticket he signed. And I went home with a signed James Taylor ticket. That's a big success. Now, I'm glad to know some of you are as excited as I was at the time. So that's just like a simple, obviously doesn't really relate to our industry. I'm now gonna walk you through something related more to product and something that we shipped last year. So I work with the ad product team, and a product that we shipped last year is called the Dotdash Odyssey. And we were super excited about this product because it kind of did everything in terms of the challenges that we were getting and feedback we were getting from the sales team. It was a mobile-first linear experience. It leaned in on our organic traffic, which meant we have a lot of articles, let's say for this specific example. Let me see if I could play the video. Yay, Jackelyn. We have a lot of articles around spring cleaning on the spruce, so actually being able to take all that organic traffic and package it up together for an advertiser, so we were super excited about that. It could integrate an advertiser's product, or they could have collaboration in terms of the actual copy. It leaned into our illustration style design prowess. It was a first-to-market opportunity, which, you know, advertisers love those. And from an engineering perspective, it was components. So it was gonna save us a lot of time and money to build it internally because we could use the same thing again and again. And that also cut down on production time. So we were super, super stoked. And all of these reasons actually together is why we fumbled in initially rolling it out, because we were talking to ourselves and we were focusing on all the product features instead of pausing and thinking about like, what's the so what for my audience? So after, I would say, I don't wanna say failing, but not succeeding for about 3 months, and we were scratching our heads because it did all the things. We had an opportunity to pitch it to one of our premium partners that we had been working with throughout the year, Verizon Accessories. I'm having trouble going to the next slide. And we decided to take a little bit of a different approach. So we knew from reading an RFP, which it's surprising. I think a lot of people don't read RFPs, but that's where you get all the information. We knew from the RFP that Verizon wanted to position itself as a go-to destination for Verizon accessories. So I think a lot of time people hear the Verizon brand and you think, oh, it's a mobile provider, but they want to do a lot more, and they are doing a lot more. So that was their main KPI for their Q4 18 campaign. And we knew, just in terms of defining the objective, we knew internally that we wanted to lean into our organic traffic and our content advantage. So knowing that Verizon was to establish themselves as a top-of-mind tech accessories company and also to sell products online, we knew that that was the angle to go from a pitch perspective. And this is where things got really interesting. When we went to identify the strongest data points, rather than focusing on the product itself or the design features or all the beautiful things that we could do for Verizon, we actually focused more on the content aspect of it. So since people come to us with questions, about 80% of our traffic is from SEO, we're able to see the questions that people are asking, we listen, and then we're able to, first of all, optimize our content to get it really tight to make sure that we're answering those questions, but we're also able to share those insights with advertisers. So there were two questions we saw that were the lead questions that really opened our eyes in terms of finding this white space for Verizon. One was that a lot of times when people are searching about smart homes, the question is literally, what is a smart home? So within the marketplace, there's kind of this lack of knowledge to even understand what a smart home is, what it does. People talk about it, but no one really knows what it is. And the second is that we could see consumers were searching for specific products like Google, Amazon Alexa, Samsung. They were searching for the types of products rather than searching for like a smart fridge, like categories. So what we realized was our strength was in the content and taking our content advantage in this insight to Verizon, because knowing that our users are really confused about what exactly a smart home is and how they use it, knowing that Verizon wanted to position themselves as a commerce destination, kind of marrying the two, that was our way to go. So we then crafted a TLDR, and I actually pulled, it's going to be a lot of words on a slide, which I don't like, but I pulled two of the slides from the pitch just to show you kind of how we broke it down. So we have tons of data coming our way. We leaned in on 4 specific insights, and then we socialized these insights and then converted it to the recommendation for the client. So this was our second insight, which is consumers aren't aware of the smart home device options available to them. These were the proof points, and this is where we could actually see queries, which are essentially like Google searches, general queries, brand-specific queries, and then we identified the opportunity that Verizon had in the marketplace to showcase their devices and also answer this question of what is a smart home. We then pitched the Odyssey. So we came up with this idea of a toast to smart home holidays. Who needs elves when you have a smart home? I have a smart home. I could still use some elves, but whatever. And then it also clicked out to the content. And it was a success. It closed. Verizon was super happy. This is just kind of recapping what we identified in terms of like the goal and the tight message. They wanted to establish themselves as the top tech accessory destination. Consumers weren't aware of the smart home options available to them. And Odyssey is the format that we would execute it in, but ultimately we were leaning into this content advantage. And not only did we close the business, but we also won an award for this specific execution, which was pretty exciting. All because we followed the simple framework. It might have taken us 3 months to get there, but nonetheless, we got there. So before answering any questions, I just wanted to kind of share another, aside from Don Draper, we have another sage, Albert Einstein. This is a quote that's really resonated with me over the years. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I sometimes have the challenge of wanting to share everything because I get really excited about a specific topic, and I was like, but this little nuance is so important. This is really important. It might be exciting to you, but you don't want to be talking to yourself. And I think that if you really, really understand the value of what you're offering and you really, really understand your audience, you'll be able to break it down into 2 to 3 statements or supporting proofs and be able to have that really, really tight, concise, relevant, and actionable message. So that's it. Yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Jackelyn. Okay, I was sleeping at the wheel earlier. Sorry. So we're going to have you take questions, but we're going to have Carrie come up and start setting up while you're taking questions. Using my brain. Questions for Jackelyn? Ready? Oh.
was a great presentation. I loved it. I just wanted to lean into that one part of your framework around knowing your audience. So I know you gave the example of looking at queries and like SEO, but I'm curious, what other methods have you used to gather insight about an audience?
So depends on who the audience is, obviously. If we're talking to advertisers, I think always talking to the customer themselves is the most valuable form of information gathering. For us, when we're talking about our site users, aside from SEO, we have a few other platforms where we could actually have that conversation. So whether it be on social or events, we're able to information gather in that way. But honestly, I think across the board, being able to go directly to the source to gather the information is the most valuable. At least that's what I found. We do a lot of user testing, specifically for our products, usertesting.com. But like one small product example is we have these big hero images that our like CEO and our head of design, they weren't really excited about, but we actually took it out, showcased it with our users, and it turns out that they love that premium feel, and that actually ended up changing how we executed the product. So I think talking to consumers directly is always the most powerful, and then obviously staying up to date on like industry news. I know this is random, but like if you have your top clients and you're able to listen to their earnings calls, I learn a lot of stuff about what's going on and what matters to them in their business, because that will ultimately impact your relationship with them.